Hello, good afternoon. This is Midday Report here on TVP World. I'm your host, Marie Cato. U.S. President Donald Trump slapped fresh import levies on dozens of trade partners overnight, sending stock markets into chaos. While this spells trouble for up to 60 countries, the European Union has exhaled a sigh of relief, as European exports will only be targeted with a 15% tariff upon arrival in the U.S. from August 7th. We are joined live now by our EU correspondent Angela Skujins in Brussels. Good afternoon, Angela. So why is this good news for the European Union?
Yes, so not only does this bring stability to traders in Europe exporting their goods into the US, but it also means that the United States and EU relationship is on more firm footing after US President Donald Trump outlined the contours of his new trade policies on Liberation Day, which sent Brussels and Washington into months of back and forth negotiations to try and find a compromise, an end that they were both happy with. This came to a head on Sunday in Scotland, where US President Donald Trump and European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen agreed that most EU exports into the US will be targeted with that 15% import levy. Now, this executive order that came in overnight stipulates this. This is exactly what the European Commission was waiting for. This is what we were told yesterday by spokespeople, that the ball was essentially in US President Donald Trump's court, that to get this transatlantic trade relationship moving once again, that executive order needed to hit the ground running, that 15% needed to wind back that 30% massive tariff that was expected to kick in today and wipe out virtually thousands of jobs, as well as certain industries in and of itself. But the European Commissioner for Trade, Maroš Šefčovič, who has been tasked with handling these high-stakes negotiations, also posted on social media platform X his thoughts regarding this executive order.
The new U.S. tariffs reflect the first results of the EU-U.S. deal, especially the 15% all-inclusive tariff cap. This reinforces stability for EU businesses, as well as trust in the transatlantic economy. EU exporters now benefit from a more competitive position. The work continues.
It's important to note that this 15% import levy is expected to kick in on August the 7th. This allows the EU and the US to hammer out some of those details that were not agreed upon in Scotland. What happens next is that leaders from the EU and the US will need to agree to a political document. This is a non-binding legal letter that details the exact intricacies of this trade deal. We have seen cracks emerge from both sides of the Atlantic regarding issues such as that $750 billion US investment from the EU into US energy, as well as some controversy regarding digital rules from the EU sides. We're hoping that this will be clarified in this letter, but again, this is not legally binding. What are these executive orders, as well as these legal trade agreements from the EU side. However, that requires at least 3/4 majority. We need those EU leaders to get back to the table and agree on these measures, which could take months as well. So while this executive order spells trouble for dozens of trading partners, it is certainly good news for the EU.
Angela Skujins updating us from Brussels. Many thanks. 31 people, including 5 children, were killed and more than 150 wounded during a Russian strike on the Ukrainian capital overnight Wednesday, marking one of the deadliest attacks on Kyiv since the start of the full-scale war.
During the attack, Russian forces launched over 300 Shahed drones and about 8 ballistic missiles against Ukraine, with most of them targeting the capital. The attack sparked international outrage as U.S. President Donald Trump criticized Russian actions, calling them disgusting.
I think it's Russia, I think it's disgusting what they're doing. I think it's disgusting. This is Biden's war, it's not my war. But I said if I get in, I'll try and get the thing stopped.
Polish Foreign Minister Radosław Sikorski and his Ukrainian counterpart Andriy Sybiha are meeting on Friday in Chobyel in Poland for informal discussions on bilateral cooperation and continued support for Ukraine amidst the ongoing conflict with Russia. The two ministers are expected to address various issues concerning the collaboration between Poland and Ukraine, with a focus on reinforcing their partnership and evaluating ongoing aid initiatives. The meeting marks another crucial step in the developing relationship between the two neighboring nations. Sikorski and Sybiha previously met in mid-July during the commemoration of the 5th anniversary of the Lublin Triangle, a cooperation forum between Poland, Lithuania and Ukraine. Friday's talks will touch upon both the logistical aspects of aiding Ukraine and addressing the ongoing presence of displaced Ukrainians in Poland. The German Defense Ministry has announced that 2 Patriot systems will be delivered to Ukraine. Germany's stocks will then be replenished with new Patriots bought from the United States. A statement from the German federal government on Friday said Germany will deliver 2 Patriot systems to Ukraine after reaching an agreement with the US that Berlin will be first in line to receive the latest systems in return. German Defense Minister Boris Pistorius praised Washington's commitment and added, quote, "Germany can initially support Ukraine with launchers and then with additional Patriot system components." Additionally, in his latest remarks, Ukraine's defense minister said Germany is set to deliver the additional Patriot launchers in the coming days. "31 people, including 5 children, were killed and more than 150 wounded during a Russian strike on the Ukrainian capital overnight Wednesday, marking one of the deadliest attacks on Kyiv since the start of the full-scale war.
During the attack, Russian forces launched over 300 Shahed drones and about 8 ballistic missiles against Ukraine, with most of them targeting the capital. The attack sparked international outrage as U.S. President Donald Trump criticized Russian actions, calling them disgusting.
I think it's Russia, I think it's disgusting what they're doing. I think it's disgusting. This is Biden's war, it's not my war. But I said if I get in, I'll try and get the thing stopped. But I think what Russia's doing is very sad. A lot of Russians are dying. You have a lot of Russians, more Russians are dying, but Russians are dying, Ukrainians are dying.
Trump also promised to impose sanctions on Russia once the new 10-day deadline he gave Putin earlier this week expires, unless the Kremlin halts its violence.
Yeah, we have about 8. Yeah, we're going to put sanctions. I don't know that sanctions bother him. You know, they know about sanctions. I know better than anybody about sanctions and tariffs and everything else. I don't know if that has any effect, but we're going to do it.
Meanwhile, U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff is planning to visit Moscow to meet with Vladimir Putin.
So today, as far as I recall, Witkoff should be in Israel. And after that, he travels to Russia, to Moscow, where he will obviously meet Vladimir Putin, I guess, and maybe deliver some messages from Donald Trump. Because as of now, it doesn't seem that Russia takes all these ultimatums and threats about sanctions that have been made by Trump and his officials really very seriously.
Despite sanctions and ultimatums from the EU and US, Russia continues escalating its attacks on Ukrainian cities. According to Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy, Russia uses thousands of drones and missiles monthly, with hundreds deployed daily, killing dozens and causing severe destruction.
Once again, this vile strike by Russia demonstrates the need for increased pressure on Moscow and additional sanctions. No matter how much the Kremlin denies their effectiveness, sanctions do work, and they must be strengthened. In July alone, Russia used over 5,100 glide bombs against Ukraine, more than 3,800 Shaheds, and nearly 260 missiles of various types, 128 of them ballistic. This can only be stopped through joint efforts by America, Europe, and other global actors.
In response to the attack, August 1st has been declared a day of mourning in Kyiv.
Poland commemorates the Warsaw uprising today, the greatest battle of underground resistance against Nazi German occupation spanning the Second World War. It is an event that symbolizes the courage of the Polish nation, but at the same time, it was a great tragedy. At least 200,000 Poles died in the span of just 2 months. We now go live to our correspondent Kazimierz Wysiak, who is in Warsaw attending some of the state ceremonies. Good afternoon, Kazimierz. Can you tell us more about the uprising and the scope of the commemorations today?
Good afternoon, Marie. Well, This event, the Warsaw Uprising, is definitely one of the most pivotal moments in the contemporary history of Poland and this city, but it is also a great source of trauma for generations of Poles. As you've said, 200,000, at least 200,000 Poles died in the span of just 2 months. More than 10,000 insurgents were also killed by the Nazi Germans during the fighting. Now, the uprising was only supposed to last 3 days. It lasted 63, more than 2 months of intense fighting in the Polish capital 81 years ago on August 1st, 1944. And for all intents and purposes, this was supposed to be a military operation. It was organized by the military commanders of the Polish underground state, but thousands of civilians, residents of Warsaw, signed up for the fighting. And while it technically was a military operation, the insurgents were severely under-equipped. Just to give an example, one insurgent battalion could have around 300 men and women fighting, but they would have, for example, just a few rifles, a handful of pistols, and then the rest would just be armed with makeshift grenades or nothing, fighting against very well-equipped Germans. So the fight was very uneven. The goal of this uprising was to liberate Warsaw from the Nazi German occupation before the Soviets would come in. They were closing in fast from the east, and Poles wanted to greet them as a free nation. Unfortunately, the uprising was not successful, and today it is also a great source of controversy, with some modern-day historians claiming that the decision itself to launch the uprising was a mistake, leading to the deaths of so many people. Still, that doesn't take away from the great sacrifice and courage of Polish men and women who fought in the uprising. One of them right now is speaking at the ceremonies here, one of many which are taking place across the Polish capital. There are just a handful of the witnesses of these events who still are with us. They were only teenagers when all of that was taking place in 1944. And while there are many such celebrations today, ceremonies here in the Polish capital and across Poland, the most important one, the most iconic one, will be at 5 p.m. That was the hour when the uprising was to begin all these years ago, and at that hour, at 5 p.m., the entire Polish capital will stand still. Cars and pedestrians will stop, there will be sirens playing across the town, and people will bow their heads in respect for a full minute, honoring those who gave their lives for free Poland in 1944. Back to you in the studio, Marie.
Thank you very much, Kazimierz Wysiak, joining us live from the Warsaw Uprising commemorations. On the 81st anniversary of the Warsaw Uprising, Polish President Andrzej Duda and President-elect Karol Nawrocki marked the occasion in the Wola district of Warsaw. During a commemorative ceremony, Duda highlighted the horrific atrocities committed by the Nazi Germans during the uprising, while Nawrocki reflected on the fact that the uprising was a symbol of the nation's unwavering fight for freedom, which began long before 1944.
Of course, we all know that soldiers of the Home Army fought supported by the people of the capital, and that they were young. We know there were bombings, that people were dying in Warsaw. We know that the city's civilian population also suffered, precisely because the uprising was underway and fighting was taking place. This is common knowledge. What is not common knowledge, however, is that in the very first days of the Warsaw Uprising, the Germans began the extermination of the capital's population. Acting on an order issued by Adolf Hitler, carried out by Heinrich Himmler and his subordinate officers, the plan was simply to murder the inhabitants of Warsaw. This criminal operation began here, in Warsaw's Wola district, where in the first days of August 1944, between 50,000 and 60,000 civilians were massacred. Ordinary people, dragged from their homes and tenements, then gathered in various places. The Warsaw Uprising was an utterly Polish uprising. It was utterly Polish because we are the kind of people who, even in the face of Nazi German cruelty and barbarity, were ready to rise. militarily, socially, ready to make great sacrifices, to give our very lives so that Poland could be free and independent. The tragedy of our capital, Warsaw, did not begin in 1944 nor in 1943, but on September 1st, 1939. Warsaw was systematically destroyed, bombed. The men and women of Warsaw, Poles across all of occupied Poland, were murdered. Every day in Poland there were as many as 15 massacres, both of civilians and of soldiers. So what happened on August 1st, 1944 was a clear voice and a powerful expression of the remarkable citizens of the Polish state, then operating underground, and it was a cry for freedom, independence and dignity.
And that concludes Midday Report. Thank you so much for joining us, and stay tuned for more on TVP World. Goodbye.